feeling maybe a bit overwhelmed by government news these days.
Oh, definitely.
Between policy shifts, agency announcements, it can really be a lot to keep track of.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why today we're doing a deep dive into something pretty significant.
Okay.
It's a recent court decision, and it's temporarily pumped the brakes on the Trump administration's big plans.
The mass layoffs and the agency restructuring plans.
Exactly that. A major shakeup they had planned for federal agencies.
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't just, another headline. It really gets into some fundamental questions about how the executive branch works.
Right.
And for this deep dive, we're mainly looking at a recent Fox News article that lays out the details pretty well. The legal challenge, the judge's ruling.
Okay, so our mission really is to get beyond the surface. We want to understand what this ruling actually means, what the administration was aiming for with these changes,
Right.
and the main concerns that actually led to this lawsuit.
And we should probably touch on the key players involved, too.
Yes, definitely, including Elon Musk and this new Department of Government Efficiency, DOG, they're calling it.
The DOGE, yeah, that's the one.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What was the core of the administration's plan to begin with?
Well, it goes back to February.
Mm-hmm.
The administration put out a directive, basically telling federal agencies, you need to work with DOGE.
The Department of Government Efficiency.
Right, and the goal was to identify targets for, significant staff reductions. Mass layoffs, really.
Across the federal government.
That was the plan, yeah. Widespread layoffs.
And what was the justification? What were they, hoping to achieve with shrinking the workforce like that?
Well, the stated goals, according to the article, were all about making government more streamlined, more efficient.
How specifically?
They talked about eliminating duplicate roles, cutting out management layers they thought were unnecessary,
Okay.
getting rid of jobs they called non-critical. The plan also involved pushing for more automation for routine tasks.
Automation, right.
And consolidating things like closing regional fields offices and also cutting back on outside contractors.
So trying to do more internally, perhaps, but with fewer people.
Sort of. The underlying idea you'd assume was cutting costs and boosting overall efficiency. That was the public rationale.
Okay, so a pretty ambitious vision for reshaping how government works.
Definitely comprehensive.
But it sounds like it hit some immediate, headwinds, right? That's where the legal challenge comes in.
Exactly. On April 28th, you had this broad coalition file a lawsuit.
Who was involved?
It was unions representing federal workers, various nonprofit organizations, and even some local governments got involved.
Interesting. And their main argument?
Their central claim was that this kind of massive government reorganization wasn't something the executive branch could just do on its own.
Huh.
They argued it needed explicit authorization from Congress. And without that, they said it was simply unlawful.
And were they worried about the practical effects?
Oh, very much so. They argued pretty strongly that this, quote, unlawful attempt to reorganize had already thrown agencies into, chaos.
Chaos!
Yeah, and disrupted critical services that people rely on. Their position was essentially that you don't get efficient government by just, laying off tons of experienced people.
Right.
And then trying to reorganize everything haphazardly.
Okay, so the stage was set for a legal fight. And then last Friday, a judge weighed in. Tell us about that decision.
Right. U.S. District Judge Susan Ilston. She issued what's called a temporary restraining order, a TRO.
Which is like a pause button.
Exactly. An emergency short-term pause.
Yeah.
In this case for 14 days. And it specifically blocks these mass layoffs from happening.
And critically.
Critically, Judge Ilston sided with the plaintiffs, the unions, and the other groups who brought the suit.
The article we're using mentions some key quotes from her ruling. What jumped out at you?
Well, several things. First, Judge Ilston was really clear.
Okay.
The president can seek changes in the executive branch, but he has to do it lawfully. And crucially, for these big, large-scale reorganizations, she stressed the need for cooperation with Congress.
The legislative branch?
Precisely.
She even brought up history, didn't she?
She did, yeah. She pointed out that, many presidents have sought and gotten cooperation from Congress for big government restructurings before.
So there's precedent.
Exactly. Her implication was pretty clear. This is how it's often done, work with Congress.
Yeah.
And she said nothing stops the current administration from doing that, just like they did in a previous term.
Right.
In fact, she went a step further. She said the president likely must request congressional cooperation to order the kinds of changes he's seeking here.
Likely must. That sounds pretty strong.
It's significant language, yes.
And this ruling itself, it seems like it's being seen as a major hurdle for the administration's plans.
That's right. The article calls it the broadest of its kind so far against these overhaul efforts.
Okay.
And Judge Ilston also set a date, May 22nd, for another hearing. That one's to consider maybe a longer halt.
Like a preliminary injunction.
Exactly. A preliminary injunction that could keep the layoffs on hold for much longer while the whole case plays out. The TRO is just that initial short pause.
Got it. And it sounds like the judge was really focused on the potential harm if these layoffs actually happened.
Absolutely. She specifically found that the plaintiffs, the group suing, were likely to suffer irreparable harm if she didn't issue the TRO.
Irreparable harm. That's a key legal standard, isn't it?
It is. It means damage that couldn't easily be fixed later. She said the pause was needed to keep things as they are, preserve the status quo while they examined the legal arguments.
Right.
And she had a very direct quote about the scope of that harm. She said the court wasn't just looking at lost income for one person, but the widespread termination of salaries and benefits for individuals, families, and communities.
Wow. So looking at the broader ripple effects.
Exactly. It really shows the potential economic and social impacts the judge was considering.
That really paints a picture of the stakes involved. And did she indicate whether she thinks the lawsuit itself has merit?
She did, at least at this early stage. Judge Ilston said the plaintiffs are likely to succeed on the merits of at least some of their claims. Meaning she thinks they have a strong legal argument that the administration probably exceeded its authority and potentially violated something called administrative law, which, basically governs how government agencies have to operate, making sure they stay within their legal boundaries and follow proper procedures.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's circle back to the key players you mentioned earlier, Elon Musk and DOGE.
Right.
What does the article suggest about their specific roles in all this?
Well, the article definitely positions Musk and DOGE as being right at the forefront, leading these restructuring efforts.
So driving the process.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
It doesn't give a ton of detail on DOGE's exact structure or power, but the context implies it's this new entity pushing the efficiency and layoff plans.
And the lawsuit targets others too.
Yes. The plaintiffs also named the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and the Office of Personnel Management, OPM.
Okay.
Accusing them, too, of overstepping their legal authority in how they were involved.
It is, well, certainly noticeable to have someone like Elon Musk from the private sector so involved in a government restructuring like this.
It's unusual, yeah. It suggests maybe a different kind of philosophy about how you achieve government efficiency.
Now, what about the administration side of the story? Did the article get their reaction to this court ruling?
Well, according to the Fox News piece, they did reach out.
To the White House?
Yes, for comment on the judge's decision, the TRO. But the article specifically notes they hadn't heard back by the time they published.
Okay. So, at least from this source, no official word from the administration on this particular development yet.
Not within that time frame, no.
All right, so as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what's the absolute key takeaway here? What should we really understand from this?
I think the core message is that a federal judge has stepped in, for now at least, and stopped these big layoff plans.
Right.
And the reason highlights a fundamental principle. Major reorganizations in the executive branch, especially ones involving huge personnel changes, probably need Congress to sign off.
Legislative branch buy-in.
Exactly. Congressional authorization seems key, according to this judge.
And really, when you zoom out, you see this classic tension, don't you? Between the executive branch wanting to move fast, implement its vision for efficiency, and then running into these legal and procedural checks and balances, plus the concerns from the people directly affected.
Precisely. It really throws that whole debate about the balance of power between the president and Congress right into the spotlight.
Yeah.
And how that balance ultimately shapes not just the structure of government, but how stable and effective it is.
So as you process all this information, it kind of leaves us with a bigger question to chew on, doesn't it? Well, what are the broader, maybe longer-term implications of this push and pull, between what the executive branch wants to do and what Congress allows when it comes to actually shaping how our government is built and how it works?
That's a great question. Definitely something with far-reaching consequences to think about.